In 1976, you could walk into any corner shop in Britain, hand over 3 pence, and receive something that would define the rest of your afternoon. The wrapper would crinkle, your fingers would go sticky, and the taste would be so specific, so perfectly engineered for the British child that nothing made since has quite replaced it. Number 14 on this list triggered a genuine moral panic in Westminster. Number 8 was quietly pulled from shelves after parents campaigned against it. And number 1, the sweet that every British child of the 1970s will name instantly, is still being demanded back in petition after petition, decade after decade. Sweet manufacturers spent millions developing these products, and millions more making us forget them. Because if you still remembered the real taste of number 3, you would never pay £2.50 for a novelty bag of imported American sweets again. These are 25 British sweets from the 1970s that vanished. Some were killed by accountants, some by health scares, some simply by time. Let us count down. Number 25th. The Texan Bar arrived in British corner shops in 1971 with a television campaign that became the most quoted advert in school playgrounds for a decade. Sure, the cowboy would drawl, it's a bit of a chew. And every child in Britain knew exactly what he meant. The bar was a thick slab of peanut caramel and nougat, coated in milk chocolate. It cost 3 pence. It took approximately 20 minutes to eat properly if you wanted to avoid pulling out a filling. The wrapper was brown and red with a 10-gallon hat. You could find them at the counter of every Woolworths, every corner shop, every school tuck shop from Cornwall to Caithness. The genius of the Texan Bar was its stubbornness. It refused to be eaten in a hurry. There was no way to look sophisticated eating one. Your jaw ached. Your fingers became coated in a fine film of caramel. You did not care. Rowntree's pulled it in 1984, citing falling sales. But the real reason was simpler. The competition had gotten cheaper. The Texan Bar never did anything wrong. The market just moved on without it. Number 24. Aztec Bar. Cadbury launched the Aztec Bar in 1967 and spent the next decade trying to convince Britain it was something exotic. It was chocolate, nougat, and caramel, much like a Mars bar, but with a slightly different base that gave it a completely different texture. The wrapper was dark red and gold, with an Aztec sun motif that felt genuinely foreign on a 1970s sweet counter. It cost 3 pence and sold well throughout the early part of the decade. Children bought it because it looked mysterious. Parents bought it because it was slightly cheaper. By 1978, Cadbury discontinued it quietly. No announcement, no fanfare. One week it sat on the shelf between the flake and the Freddo. The next, it was gone. Whole generations have spent the years since insisting the Aztec Bar was better than a Mars. They are probably right. The nougat had a different density, a chewier, more yielding quality, and the chocolate-to-filling ratio was more generous. Nobody consulted the customers before pulling it. That has been the pattern ever since. Number 23rd. Pacers. Rowntree's Pacers were the intellectual sweet of the 1970s. Mint and lime. Together. In a chewy strip. The combination sounds wrong. The first one you put in your mouth recalibrated everything you thought you understood about confectionery. They were pale green and white striped, oblong, and came in a roll that cost 3 pence and contained 6 or 7 sweets. Children who bought Pacers were considered quietly sophisticated. The mint hit first, then the lime ambushed you from behind, and the chew lasted long enough to take you through an entire geography lesson without detection. Teachers who confiscated Pacers always looked slightly puzzled, as if they could not work out why a mint sweet was also a lime sweet. Rowntree's never explained why they stopped making them. Some theories involve ingredient costs. Others involve the 1990s trend toward purely fruity sweets and away from mint. But no sweet made since has successfully combined mint and lime in that specific ratio, and the gap in the market remains defiantly unfilled. Number 22. Toffo. Macintosh's Toffo came in a yellow and white roll that every British child recognized on sight. They were individual toffee sweets wrapped in wax paper, soft enough to eat without risking dental work, flavored in vanilla, coffee, and plain toffee varieties. A roll cost 3 pence and contained about a dozen sweets. The ritual was important. You peeled the outer wrapper, extracted one toffo carefully, and folded the end back down to save the rest for later. Nobody ever saved the rest for later. The coffee flavor was the controversial one. Children dismissed it entirely. Grandparents hoarded the coffee rolls specifically. That generational divide over coffee toffo was the first confectionery argument most British children ever witnessed, and losing was non-negotiable on both sides. Toffo lasted longer than most on this list. It did not finally disappear until 2008, but the version made in the 1970s, softer, sweeter, less uniform in shape, was a different product from what followed. The original is the one worth mourning. Number 21, Bar 6. Rowntree's Bar 6 was the sensible one, 6 fingers of chocolate-coated wafer biscuit. Neat, orderly, dependable. It cost 4 pence and appeared in lunchboxes across Britain from the mid-1960s through to 1992. The wafer was crisp. The chocolate was proper, thick Rowntree's chocolate that felt substantial in the mouth, not the thin coating that started appearing on similar products in the 1980s. You could eat it one finger at a time, or bite straight through the whole bar like someone who had given up on decorum. The Bar 6 was the sweet that suggested you had your life together. Kit Kat was already famous. Club was already established. But Bar 6 had a quiet confidence that neither of those possessed. It never had a major advertising campaign. It did not need one. When Rowntree's was absorbed into Nestlé and rationalization began, Bar 6 was pulled with almost no notice. Its loyal customers did not find out until they reached the shelf and found something else in its place. Number 20. Cabana. Rowntree's Cabana was what the 1970s understood tropical to mean. It was a layer of coconut and a glace cherry covered in milk chocolate on a biscuit base. The wrapper was yellow and blue with a palm tree. It cost 3 pence and tasted like a bounty that had been somewhere considerably more exciting. The cherry was the defining feature. It sat in the center of the bar, fluorescent red, suspiciously perfect, sweeter than anything occurring in nature. Children who loved Cabana loved it with genuine intensity. Children who hated glace cherries removed the cherry with surgical precision before eating the rest. Rows broke out over the cherries in classrooms and at kitchen tables across Britain every single week. Rowntree's discontinued Cabana in 1992, when the bounty had thoroughly dominated the coconut chocolate market. The cherry was never replaced. A generation of cherry-forward confectionery fans has been quietly grieving ever since. Number 19, Caramac. Rowntree's Caramac was not chocolate. It never claimed to be chocolate. It was a caramel-flavored bar made from sugar, vegetable fat, and milk. It tasted unlike anything else on the sweet counter. The bar was pale gold in color. The wrapper was orange and gold. It cost 3 pence, and it offered a sweetness that was somehow both lighter and more intense than chocolate at the same time. First, pattern break. Here is something the confectionery industry does not advertise. When Nestlé absorbed Rowntree's in 1988, they inherited a range of genuinely distinctive British products that had no equivalent anywhere else in the world. The accountants looked at the sales figures and compared them to Kit Kat. The distinctive products looked poor by comparison. They always will. Caramac outlasted most of the sweets on this list, surviving until Nestlé finally discontinued it in 2023. The reaction on British social media was immediate and furious. Petitions gathered tens of thousands of signatures within days. Nestlé did not reverse the decision. The pale gold bar that tasted of nothing else is gone, not because people stopped buying it, but because it was not profitable enough for a multinational. That is a different reason entirely. Anglo Bubbly was the bubblegum of the working-class corner shop in the 1970s. A pink brick of gum in a blue wrapper, it cost 1 penny and came in a flavor described on the packet simply as bubble gum. The gum was hard at first, then soft. Then you blew a bubble that was either magnificent or exploded immediately against your nose. The Anglo Bubbly bubble was legendary among children who practiced for hours at the back of classrooms. Blowing a proper bubble without it sticking to your eyelashes was considered a genuine skill. Some children produced bubbles the size of a grapefruit. Others never managed anything beyond a small grey dome and felt the shame of it deeply. The gum lost its flavor in about 90 seconds, but nobody threw it away. You kept chewing long after the taste was gone, because the bubble potential remained. Anglo Bubbly disappeared in the early 1980s, replaced by Hubba Bubba and Bazooka Joe, neither of which produced quite the same sized bubble or sold for quite the same price. Number 17. Secret. Rowntree's secret was the romantic sweet. A chocolate filled with hazelnut praline, sold in a small box rather than a wrapper. Ostensibly targeted at adults, but consumed mainly by children who discovered the boxes in their parents' cupboards. It arrived in the early 1970s and positioned itself as a discreet indulgence, something you gave to someone you admired. A box of 4 cost about 10 pence. The hazelnut praline filling was smooth and genuinely continental, more in the tradition of French confectionery than anything else in the British market at the time. It tasted sophisticated. In the 1970s, in a British corner shop between the Spangles and the Toffo, that felt extraordinary. Rowntree's used secret to demonstrate that British sweets could have elegance, and it worked. When Nestlé absorbed the range, Secret was among the first casualties. The hazelnut praline in that specific dark chocolate shell never returned to British shelves in the same form. Something was removed from the range that had no adequate replacement. Number 16. Nutty. Rowntree's Nutty Bar was exactly what it said. A thick block of peanuts set in caramel and coated in chocolate, with a wrapper featuring a cartoon squirrel who looked unreasonably pleased with himself. It cost 3 pence and weighed substantially more than it had any right to for that price. The peanuts were dense. The caramel was the sticky variety that threatened dental work, but delivered flavor. The chocolate held everything together in a way that felt structurally confident. Nutty was not subtle. It did not attempt sophistication. It was a serious quantity of food for very little money, and British children in the 1970s understood that value immediately. The squirrel on the wrapper became familiar enough that children named him, though Rowntree's never confirmed an official name, and certainly never asked. When Nutty disappeared in the 1990s, the Star Bar attempted to fill the gap. It did not fill it. The peanut-to-caramel ratio was different. The squirrel was never seen again. Number 15. Banjo. McVitie's Banjo Bar arrived in 1976, and it lasted nearly 2 decades. It was a biscuit bar, coated in milk chocolate, with a layer of peanut butter inside. It cost 5 pence, and it appeared in school tuck shops at precisely the moment children needed it most. The name made no sense for a chocolate bar. Nobody questioned it. The peanut butter filling was the first time many British children encountered peanut butter in any meaningful form. America had it on sandwiches. Britain had it inside a chocolate biscuit bar, which was clearly the superior application. Texture was the revelation. The combination of crisp biscuit, dense peanut butter, and chocolate coating that broke cleanly when bitten was unlike anything else in the tuck shop window. Banjo was discontinued in 1995. Reese's peanut butter cups arrived on British shelves years later, but they were an American product, and they felt like one. Banjo was British. The proportions were different. The biscuit base changed everything. Peanut butter chocolate biscuit bar devotees are still waiting for a proper replacement. Number 14. Space dust. This is a second pattern break. In 1976, General Foods launched space dust in Britain, and it triggered a genuine moral panic. The popping candy, which was carbon dioxide trapped in sugar, crackled and exploded on the tongue, with a sensation adults genuinely believed was dangerous. Concerned parents wrote to newspapers. A doctor on a radio program suggested the crackling might be harmful to children's palates. General Foods responded by printing assurances on the packaging. Children responded by buying 3 times as much space dust. That is the pattern every time confectionery companies underestimate the British child. A sachet cost 10 pence. The experience lasted about 45 seconds of intense crackling on the tongue, then ended abruptly with a silence that was almost as startling as the noise. Children held it on their tongues in silence, eyes wide, waiting. Teachers confiscated it. Parents banned it. Grandparents were baffled by it. Space dust was eventually renamed Pop Rocks, and the formulation changed hands. What you can buy today in novelty sweet shops is noticeably quieter. The original crackled with a genuine intensity that the current version does not match. Whether the 1970s version was more potent, or whether we have simply become used to sensation, is a question nobody in the confectionery industry will answer publicly. Cadbury's Pyramint was the ambitious sweet. A pyramid-shaped piece of mint fondant coated in dark chocolate, individually wrapped in silver foil, sold in a box of 12. It cost about 15 pence a box in the mid-1970s and positioned itself somewhere between After 8 and something you might find at an actual chocolatier. The pyramid shape was functional. Each point delivered a slightly different ratio of chocolate to fondant, so eating from the tip gave pure dark chocolate, while biting through the base gave an aggressive rush of mint. Children who liked mint sweets loved Pyramint with an intensity that alarmed their parents, who had not expected passion to be directed at a confectionery geometry. The dark chocolate was proper adult dark chocolate, not the milk-based compromise that dominated the rest of the range. Pyramint disappeared in the 1980s. After 8 has occupied the mint chocolate territory ever since, sitting in its envelope in its flat black box, elegant and entirely two-dimensional. The pyramid made the act of eating more interesting. Nobody has attempted it since. Number 12. Marble. Cadbury's Marble was the engineering achievement of the 1970s sweet counter, a milk chocolate bar with white chocolate swirled through it in a marble pattern so that every single bite delivered a different combination of flavors. It cost 4 pence. The effect of biting into a marble bar and encountering an unexpected vein of white chocolate was genuinely startling the first time. Sometimes a square was almost entirely dark. Sometimes it was almost entirely white. The bar made eating chocolate into a small adventure because no 2 pieces were identical. Children would hold the bar up to the light before biting, trying to read the pattern and plan accordingly. It never worked. The interior did not match what was visible on the surface. That unpredictability was part of the design. Cadbury discontinued Marble in the 1990s. The swirled milk and white chocolate combination has been attempted by various manufacturers since, but the ratios have never been right. The Marble bar remains the example you cite when trying to explain to someone what swirled chocolate is actually supposed to taste like. Number 11. Treets. Mars launched Treets in Britain in the 1960s, and by the 1970s, they were a fixture in every sweet shop and newsagent. Two versions existed. One version was chocolate, small milk chocolate shells with a hard candy coating. The other was peanut, and it was the better one. The peanut treats were whole peanuts inside crisp chocolate shells, crunchy in a way that made the mouth work properly. They came in a cardboard tube that rattled when you shook it. The rattle was important. You could gauge how many remained without opening the tube. The peanut version later became Peanut M and Ms. The chocolate version became Minstrels. But the British Treats formula was slightly different from the American M&M, with a crispier shell and a more robustly flavored chocolate. The transition happened in 1989. Peanut Treats became Peanut M and M's, and the distinction that had existed for 2 decades was erased. M&M fans will dispute this. Treats fans are immovable on the point. The shell was different. The chocolate was different. The tube was different. These things matter. Number 10. Old Jamaica. Rowntree's Old Jamaica was chocolate for adults who wanted to feel they were doing something faintly illicit. Dark chocolate with rum essence and raisins, sold in a black wrapper with gold lettering and a sailing ship. It cost 5 pence. The rum was essence rather than actual rum, which meant children could buy it freely. And they did, holding the bar with a practiced nonchalance that fooled nobody. The raisins swelled slightly inside the dark chocolate, creating pockets of intense sweetness against the bitterness of the bar. Old Jamaica positioned itself as the opposite of the brightly colored children's sweets surrounding it. This was serious chocolate, the wrapper implied, for serious people. Children bought it anyway and tried to look world-weary while eating it behind the school bike sheds. Old Jamaica survived various ownership changes, but has become increasingly difficult to find, its availability shrinking gradually toward near disappearance. The black wrapper with the gold ship feels like something from another century, which, effectively, it is. Macintosh's Rum and Butter Toffees came in a purple and gold tin that sat on mantelpieces and side tables in living rooms across Britain throughout the 1970s. Each toffee was wrapped in gold foil, flavored with rum essence, and carried a richness that tasted like what older relatives meant when they said a proper sweet. A tin of 20 cost about 25 pence in the mid-1970s. They were not marketed as children's sweets, but children ate them anyway whenever the tin was left unattended. The rum flavor sat somewhere between butterscotch and something more mysterious. Sweet, but with an edge that told you this was not a child's first choice, which made children want them more. The toffee itself had the texture of good toffee, resistant before yielding, slow before releasing. Rum and butter toffees appeared at Christmas in particular, nestled in stockings alongside the tangerine and the coin. They disappeared gradually as premium confectionery ranges consolidated, and the tin vanished from shops. The gold foil wrappers crinkled in the hand in a specific way. Nobody has made that exact rum and butter combination since. Number 8. Dainty. Cadbury's Dainty was a coconut-flavored chocolate bar that existed almost in secret. A thin bar of milk chocolate flavored with coconut and a faint vanilla note wrapped in yellow and white packaging. It cost 3 pence and appeared in corner shops without fanfare or advertising. The coconut flavor was delicate rather than aggressive. It was not the full tropical force of a Bounty. It was coconut as a suggestion, the way a skilled confectioner uses flavor rather than simply deploying the maximum available quantity of an ingredient. Children who stumbled across the Dainty described it to friends who had never heard of it, which was most of their friends. The Dainty occupied a quiet corner of the Cadbury range, beloved by a loyal few and unknown to almost everyone else. When Cadbury rationalized its product line, the Dainty went quietly, with no campaign, and no observable moment of loss. It simply stopped appearing on shelves. The loyal few noticed. They have not forgotten, and they describe the coconut note in that specific chocolate with a precision that suggests the flavor is still entirely present in memory. Cadbury's Buttermilk was the gentle one. A round chocolate with a fondant center flavored with genuine buttermilk, slightly tangy, slightly sweet, wrapped individually in purple foil. They were sold loose at Woolworth's Pick and Mix for about 2p each and came in a box of 8 for 12p. Third pattern break. Here is what sweet companies understood in the 1970s that they have since decided is too complicated. A chocolate does not need to be dramatic to be beloved. It needs to be specific. The slight sourness of the filling balanced against the chocolate in a way that made each one feel more considered than it had any right to be at that price. Children eating buttermilk chocolates from the Woolworth's Pick and Mix counter were often confused about why they kept reaching for another one when the flavor was genuinely difficult to describe to someone who had not tried it. That confusion was the quality. Buttermilk disappeared when Cadbury rationalized its loose chocolate range. The tangy and sweet combination of the filling has never been replicated. The category of gently sour chocolate centers has been almost entirely abandoned by British confectionery, which now trends toward sweet, sweeter, sweetest, with nothing in between. Number 6. Five Boys. Fry's Five Boys was the oldest chocolate bar on this list, and the most haunting. 5 faces of a young boy showing escalating emotions were printed on the wrapper in sequence: desperation, pacification, expectation, acclamation, and realization that it was Fry's. The bar inside was plain, unadorned milk chocolate. It cost 4p. But the wrapper was the thing. Those 5 faces stared out from corner shop counters with a Victorian intensity that made the bar feel fundamentally different from everything around it. The original image dated from 1902 and had barely changed in 70 years. Eating a Fry's Five Boys in 1975 meant tasting something that had been made in essentially the same form since the Edwardian era. British children did not know this history. They just knew the 5 faces and bought the bar because it looked strange, and the facial progression told a story they could follow on the walk home from school. Fry's discontinued Five Boys in 2008. The 5 faces looked out from sweet counters for over a century before finally going dark. Nothing in British confectionery has occupied that particular territory since. It was a sweet that was also a piece of visual storytelling. Number 5. Opal Fruits. Here is where companies become villains. Mars renamed Opal Fruits to Starburst in 1998 to align the British market with the American one. The sweets did not change. The recipe was reportedly identical. Only the name was different. But the name was everything. Opal Fruits. Say it properly. The words sit in the mouth like the sweet itself, rounded and particular, distinctly and irreversibly British. The original 4 flavors were strawberry, lemon, orange, and lime. The lime was the one. Bright green, aggressively citric, the kind of flavor that made your jaw ache slightly on the first chew. Children in the 1970s ate them in packets costing 5p and conducted serious arguments about lime versus strawberry that were never resolved. The renaming in 1998 was not a confectionery decision. It was an erasure. The sweets became American sweets with an American name on British shelves, and a connection to British childhood was severed in a meeting room where nobody consulted the customers. Mars eventually brought the Opal Fruits name back as a limited edition following public pressure. The original 1970s lime tartness has never fully returned. You can taste the difference. Millions of British people can taste the difference. The company chose the name change anyway. Number 4. Sweet cigarettes. Sweet cigarettes were the sweet that would never be manufactured today. A white sugar stick with a red painted tip, designed to look like a lit cigarette, sold in a box that replicated a cigarette packet with the same typeface and color scheme. They cost 1 penny for a box of 12. Children held them between their fingers the way they had seen adults hold real cigarettes. They raised them to their lips. They blew on the red tip and watched fine sugar dust drift away in the cold air. It was performance as confectionery. Theater for children who wanted to practice being adults. The sweet itself tasted of compressed sugar, with a faint chalky note. Nobody bought them for the taste. You bought them to pretend, briefly and completely, that you were a grown-up standing outside the school gates. They disappeared gradually through the 1980s, as health campaigners pointed out what was self-evident about a sweet shaped like a cigarette and sold to children. Nobody who ate them became a smoker because of them. The science never supported that connection, but the image was indefensible, and the image was the entire point. They tasted of childhood and nothing else. The specific innocence of a generation that found rebellion in a stick of sugar has no equivalent now. Spanish gold was confectionery that asked children to pretend they were pirates. It came in a small paper pouch shaped like a tobacco pouch, filled with shredded sweet coconut that looked convincingly like golden tobacco. It cost 2 pence. The coconut was sweet and slightly chewy, flavored with something meant to suggest rum, tropical heat, and maritime adventure. You tipped it into your palm and ate it in pinches. You rolled it between your fingers to feel the texture. You offered it to friends in the exact way you had seen working men offer tobacco from a tin. Fourth pattern break. Spanish gold and its companion. Sweet tobacco represented an entire category of confectionery that has now entirely vanished from the British market. The sweet that helped you perform an adult identity. The sweet that was not just a flavor, but a role you stepped into with a paper pouch in your pocket. Modern confectionery is flavor and texture and color and sweetness. It does not ask you to be anyone other than a child eating a sweet. The 1970s sweet counter understood something different about what children wanted. They wanted to rehearse the future. Spanish gold, sweet cigarettes, licorice pipes, and candy watches were all versions of the same insight. The generation that grew up eating these sweets did not become smokers or pirates or ranch hands. They just grew up, and when they did, the sweets that had helped them imagine growing up were already gone. Number 2. Caramac. Rowntree's Caramac deserves a second mention, and a higher placing than number 19, because what happened to it in 2023 was different from what happened to most of the sweets on this list. Most of these products were discontinued during the 1970s, the 1980s, or the 1990s, when the companies that owned them could say the market had changed, that tastes had shifted, that the economics of confectionery demanded difficult decisions. Caramac was discontinued in 2023. The British public was buying it. The shelves were not empty because demand had disappeared. The shelves became empty because Nestlé decided that a product generating modest but consistent sales was not generating enough sales by the standards of a multinational that also owned Kit Kat. It was the pale gold bar that tasted of nothing else on the market. It was retired not because Britain stopped wanting it, but because Britain did not want it loudly enough or in large enough quantities to justify its existence alongside the major brands. It was a deliberate removal, not the natural death of something whose time had passed. That is a different kind of loss. Petitions were gathered. Nestlé did not answer. Caramac is gone, while Kit Kat variants in flavors that will themselves be discontinued within 3 years continue to fill the shelves. Number 1. Spangles. Spangles top this list not because they were the most sophisticated sweet of the 1970s. They were not. They were a flat, square, aggressively flavored, hard-boiled sweet in a paper packet. Macintoshes made them from the early 1950s through to 1984. But the 1970s were when Spangles became a cultural fact, the sweet that defined what a British corner shop sweet was supposed to be. A packet cost 3 pence and contained 15 squares. The Old English flavor came in the classic red, gold, and black packet, with a glossy cellophane window, through which you could see the sweets before you bought them. The individual flavors, tangerine, blackcurrant, strawberry, pineapple, lime, were not subtle. They were vivid, almost violent in their intensity, the kind of flavor that colonized the entire mouth and stayed for 10 minutes after the sweet had dissolved. This was the point. You were buying 10 minutes of a specific, irreplaceable flavor that you could not get anywhere else. Square. Not round like a humbug, not oval like a fruit gum. Square. Each spangle sat differently in the mouth and took a slightly different path to dissolution depending on which face you started on. Children bit them in two. Adults sucked them. The two camps never fully understood each other, and were not intended to. Macintoshes pulled Spangles in 1984. The petitions demanding their return began almost immediately and have never truly stopped. Cadbury brought them back briefly in 1995 as a limited edition. They sold out within days across the country. Then they were gone again. Every few years, someone inside a confectionery company looks at the petition data and considers a proper relaunch. Every few years, the numbers do not add up to a decision. But the flat square packet with the glossy window, the rattle of 15 squares inside, and that first hit of Old English tangerine, specific and irreplaceable, have not faded for anyone who grew up buying Spangles at the corner shop. They are described with a precision that only beloved things receive. The color, the exact sound of the cellophane, the way the first sweet tasted marginally better than all the ones that followed. Spangles were not just sweets. They were the entire experience of being a British child in the 1970s, condensed into 3 pence and a crinkled paper bag. And that is why, 40 years on, they are still being demanded back. 25 sweets. Most of them were pulled without consultation, without farewell, and without any real acknowledgement of what was being taken from the people who had grown up buying them. Tell us in the comments which one you miss most. If you remember one we forgot, put it below, because this list could easily have been twice as long.